Blood dripped from the human's fingers as he stroked the snarling snout of the galaxy's deadliest predator. In the hidden cameras, the Galactic Council gasped, leaning forward as one. The massive creature's venomous fangs and razor-sharp claws hovered millimeters from the human's face. He's actually doing it. The crazy bastard is petting a Zorgaxian Deathmaw. Look at the size of that thing. The BZEC representative buzzed, compound eyes fixed on the screen. The human Daniel Dixon was stranded on planet Zorgax after crash-landing his spacecraft. The Deathmaw had emerged from the tangled underbrush, drawn by the scent of fresh blood. Daniel knew he had seconds to act. The beast had armored hide that could deflect plasma bolts. One swipe of its claws could disembowel a Cruntha warbeast. Daniel slowly raised his hand, locking eyes with the creature. He gently stroked the leathery skin above its fatal fangs. "Impossible," Kaid, the Chalnoth representative, hissed. The Chalnoth were the apex predators of the galaxy, until now. This human nobody was making them look weak, pathetic. Kaid pounded the console, leaving dents. He would deal with this insolent human personally. On the hostile surface of Zorgax, Daniel heard a deep rumbling, almost like purring. The Deathmaw pressed its snout into his palm. He couldn't believe it. He was actually petting this thing. But Daniel's mission was just beginning. He needed to find a way to repair his ship with Zorgax's unique tech. All he had was a damaged plasma rifle and a strange quantum entanglement device he'd found in the wreck, and avoid being eaten by the wildlife. If he failed, critical information about a coming war would never reach the human colonies. Billions would die. He was their only hope, whether he wanted to be or not. Talk about being thrown into the deep end. Daniel brushed the thick foliage aside as he trekked deeper into the jungle. A twig snapped beneath his boot. He froze. The undergrowth rustled. Figures emerged, brandishing crude spears, bipedal reptiles with scales of mottled green and eyes of glinting gold. Zorgi. Heart-pounding, Daniel raised his hands in a gesture of peace. He pointed to himself, then to his eyes and ears, pantomiming listening and observing. The Zorgi leader, scales scarred from battle, tilted his head. He grunted and gestured for Daniel to follow. In their village of thatched huts, Daniel sketched pictures in the dirt, stick figures of Zorgi fleeing from larger Zorgi riding beasts. The leader nodded grimly, then used a claw to draw his own picture. A hulking figure leading the raiders. Groktar. Daniel clenched his fists. He couldn't stand by while innocents suffered under a tyrant's claw. He would help these Zorgi fight back, no matter the cost. Miles away, Keed examined the twisted wreckage of Daniel's ship, running a clawed hand over the hull. He barked an order to his warriors. "Spread out! Find the human's trail. He can't hide forever." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel demonstrated guerrilla tactics to the Zorgi, showing them how to camouflage spike pits and string tripwires between the trees. He modified his sonic device, focusing the frequency to disorient Deathmaws. An ear-splitting roar shattered the night. Groktar's tribe attacked, Deathmaws surging into the village like a tidal wave of fangs and claws. But the Zorgi were ready. The beasts stumbled into pits and traps. Daniel activated the sonic emitter. The Deathmaws reeled, turning on their Zorgi riders in confusion. Groktar lunged at Daniel, swinging a bone club. Daniel ducked and swept Groktar's legs. They grappled in the dirt, trading blows. Daniel pinned Groktar down, raising a fist. A plasma bolt sizzled past his ear. Kaid stood at the edge of the village, flanked by Chalnoth warriors. His eyes gleamed with predatory hunger. "Step away from the Zorgi, human! You're coming with us!" Kaid hissed in recognition as he saw Daniel's face, broadcast to the entire galaxy by the Council's hidden cameras. "The human from the video! Take him alive!" he snarled. The Chalnoth warriors fanned out through the dense foliage, plasma rifles ready. But Daniel had spent weeks in the jungle learning its secrets. He darted through the trees, leading the Chalnoth into thickets of venomous needle vines and pits of carnivorous slime mold. The Zorgi rebels sprang from hiding, hurling stones and jabbing with spears. turning the Chalnoth's advance into chaos. As the fighting raged, Daniel and Keed suddenly found themselves face to face in a small clearing, separated from their allies. The Chalnoth bared his fangs. "Your tricks won't save you now, human. Fight me with honor, Chalnoth style. Just you and me." Daniel gripped his spear tighter, mind racing. He couldn't beat Keed in hand-to-hand combat. But maybe... "I accept your challenge, Keed, but I propose we each choose a Deathmaw to fight for us. If I win, you leave Zorgax and never come back." Keed's eyes widened. Then he threw back his head and laughed. "You've got guts, human. Very well, I accept." Zorgi and Chalnoth gathered at the edge of the clearing-turned arena, muttering and placing bets as Daniel and Keed strode out with their chosen beasts. Daniel's Deathmaw huffed but remained steady. Keed's thrashed against its chain, hissing and snapping. The battle was brutal and bloody. Claws raked, fangs flashed. Daniel and his Deathmaw moved as one, Daniel's spear darting in to find gaps in Keed's defense. The Chalnoth roared in pain and frustration as Daniel's beast clamped its jaws around the neck of Keid's mount, forcing it to the ground. "Yield," Daniel panted, spear leveled at Keid's throat. The Chalnoth warrior glared, then spat on the ground. "I yield, the human has won, we'll go." But as Keid turned to leave, a bone-chilling howl echoed from the trees. Something massive crashed through the brush, a creature unlike anything Daniel had ever seen, all spines and scales and far, far too many teeth, and it looked hungry. The titanic creature that burst from the tree line was unlike any Deathmaw Daniel had ever seen. Rows of razor-sharp metallic teeth glinted in its maw. Gleaming cybernetic implants pulsed along its scaly hide. Its eyes glowed an eerie, unnatural red. Daniel could hear the whir of servos and hydraulics as the beast stomped into the clearing, leaving deep imprints in the soft earth. Daniel and Keed exchanged a look of disbelief. What the hell was this thing? Before they could react, a swarm of normal Deathmaws poured out of the jungle behind the monster, snarling and snapping. But there was something off about them too. Their eyes were glazed, movements jerky and unnatural, almost like they were being controlled. "What is the meaning of this?" Keid growled, gripping his spear tighter. A figure emerged from the trees, riding atop the cyborg Deathmaw. It was a Chalnoth, but unlike any Daniel had seen before. Half of the alien's face was replaced with gleaming metal, a glowing red optic where his eye should be. "I am Dr. Zolaris," the Chalnoth announced, his voice a grating amalgam of organic growls and synthetic buzzes. "And this," he gestured to the beast beneath him, "is the future, the key to my revenge, and my rule." Daniel's eyes widened. He'd heard of Dr. Zolaris, a brilliant but twisted Chalnoth scientist exiled for his unethical experiments. Looks like he'd been busy. Zolaris's gaze fixed on Daniel, his organic eye narrowing. "The human who can tame Deathmaws, impressive. Join me, and together we can conquer this savage planet. I can give you power beyond your wildest dreams." Daniel hefted his spear, jaw tightening. "Sorry, Doc, I've got a job to do, people to protect, so I'm going to have to pass." Zolaris snarled, slamming his fist against the cyborg Deathmaw's plated skull. "Then you will die with the rest." The beast lunged, impossibly fast for its size. Daniel and Keid dove aside as its jaws snapped shut on empty air. The mind-controlled Deathmaws surged forward, a tide of teeth and claws. Daniel activated his sonic emitter, the high-pitched whine making the beasts recoil. But the cyborg Deathmaw barely flinched. It lashed out with a claw, smashing the device from Daniel's hand. Sparks flew as it skittered across the rocky ground, internal components exposed. Keid leapt forward, his spear a blur as he fended off the attacking Deathmaws. "The emitter!" he shouted over the din of battle. "We need it to disrupt the control signal." Daniel nodded, diving for the device. His fingers closed around the damaged casing. He looked up to see the cyborg Deathmaw looming over him, Zolaris cackling madly atop it. Daniel rolled aside as a massive claw slammed down, leaving a crater in the earth. He scrambled to his feet, rushing over to Keid. It's busted, Daniel panted, pressing the emitter into Keed's clawed hands. I don't know if... Keed snatched the device, prying open the casing with a claw. Primitive human tech, the Chalnoth grunted, pulling components from his own damaged weapon. But there may be a way. His claws worked furiously, rewiring and soldering with surprising dexterity. Daniel turned to face the oncoming horde, spear whirling. Deathmaws fell before him, but more always took their place. He could see Zorgi warriors fighting at the edge of the clearing, spears and arrows glancing off the cyborg's armored hide. Got it, Keed roared. The sonic emitter hummed to life, its pitch now painfully high. The mind-controlled Deathmaws writhed, their glazed eyes clearing. They turned on each other, on Zolaris, confusion and fury in their snarls. The cyborg Deathmaw thrashed, sparks flying from its implants. But it didn't fall. Zolaris clung to its back, screaming orders, fighting to maintain control. Daniel locked eyes with Keed. An understanding passed between them, a shared determination. Though galaxies separated them, in that moment they were united by the need to protect the innocent and stop this madman. They charged as one towards the rampaging beast, spears aimed at gaps in its armor plating. Zorgax's twin moons shone bright overhead, illuminating a battle that would decide the fate of a planet, and perhaps the galaxy. With a final desperate blow, Daniel drove his spear into the cyborg Deathmaw's exposed power core. The beast let out an ear-splitting screech as electricity arced across its metallic hide. It thrashed and convulsed before finally collapsing to the ground, smoke billowing from its ruined implants. Dr. Zolaris let out a howl of rage as Keed's warriors swarmed him, wrenching him from the beast's back and pinning him to the ground. The mad scientist spat and cursed, his cybernetic eye whirring frantically in its socket. Daniel stumbled over to where Keed lay, the Chalnoth's green blood pooling beneath him. He knelt down, grasping Keed's clawed hand. The warrior's breathing was labored, his organic eye clouded with pain. Human, Keed rasped. You must tell the Council. Zolaris not alone. Corruption runs deep. He coughed, a trickle of blood running from the corner of his mouth. Daniel leaned closer. What do you mean? Who else is involved? But Keed's grip was already slackening, his eye drifting shut. Stop them before it's too late. With a final shuddering breath, the Chalnoth warrior went limp. Daniel bowed his head, a mix of grief and grim determination washing over him. He gently closed Keed's eye and stood, turning to face the gathered Zorgi and Chalnoth. Keid's sacrifice will not be in vain, he declared, his voice carrying across the battlefield. I will bring his message to the Galactic Council, and I will not rest until the truth is revealed and justice is served. The journey back to the Galactic Council headquarters was a somber one. Daniel spent long hours in his small shuttle, poring over the data files recovered from Dr. Zolaris's lab. What he found chilled him to the bone. There were records of secret experiments, of backroom deals and illicit shipments, and at the center of it all were the names of council members, some of the most powerful and influential figures in the galaxy. When he finally stepped into the council chambers, Daniel could feel the weight of 1,000 stares upon him. The gathered representatives murmured and whispered, some in awe, others in thinly veiled hostility. Human Daniel Dixon, the council speaker intoned, his voice echoing in the vast hall. You stand before us today as a hero to some and a disruptor to others. What evidence do you bring before this august body? Daniel stepped forward, his jaw set. He held up a data chip, the culmination of all his findings. I bring proof of corruption at the highest levels of this council, he declared. Proof of illegal experiments, of the exploitation of Zorgax and its people, and of the complicity of those sworn to uphold our laws. He slotted the chip into the chamber's holographic projector. Images and documents sprang to life above the council floor, damning evidence laid bare for all to see. For a moment, there was stunned silence. Then the chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives shouted and argued, accusations flying like plasma bolts. In the heart of the storm, Daniel stood firm, his eyes locked on those he knew to be guilty. In the days that followed, the council fractured. Some called for immediate arrests and trials. Others decried Daniel's evidence as fabricated, a ploy by the humans to seize power. Factions formed and dissolved, alliances shifting by the hour. Through it all, Daniel fought to keep the focus on the Zorgi and the other indigenous peoples of Zorgax. He met with representatives in secret, lobbied for support in the corridors of power, but he could feel the tide turning against him. There were assassins in the shadows, mysterious malfunctions in his shuttle systems. Daniel knew he was being targeted, silenced, but he refused to back down. In a last, desperate gambit, he called for a summit between the Zorgi and the Chalnoth, a chance to broker a lasting peace. To his surprise, both sides agreed. The negotiations were tense, often erupting into shouting matches and threats of violence. But slowly, painfully, progress was made. The Zorgi would retain control of their ancestral lands, the right to live and hunt as they always had. And in return, the Chalnoth would be granted limited access to Zorgax to establish research outposts and diplomatic ties. It was a fragile peace, one that left none truly satisfied, but it was a start, a foundation upon which to build. When Daniel returned to the Zorgi village to announce the news, he was met not with cheers but with stony silence. The Zorgi he had fought beside, bled beside, now turned their backs on him. "You betray us, Daniel," the village chief said, his eyes hard. "You give our land to the Chalnoth, our enemies. You are no longer welcome here." Daniel tried to argue, to make them see the necessity of compromise. But his words fell on deaf ears. With heavy hearts, the Zorgi escorted him to the edge of the village, spears leveled at his back. As he walked up the ramp of his waiting shuttle, Daniel paused, looking back at the planet that had changed him in so many ways. The lush jungles, the towering peaks, the Deathmaws stalking in the shadows. He had come to Zorgax seeking only survival, but he had found so much more. Purpose, kinship, a cause worth fighting for. And now he was being cast out, exiled by the very people he had sworn to protect. As the shuttle lifted off, Daniel watched the village recede below him, until it was nothing more than a speck in a sea of green. He knew his actions on Zorgax would have consequences, ripples that would spread across the galaxy. The Council's corruption had been exposed, but the rot ran deep. There would be more battles to come, more sacrifices to be made. But for now, all Daniel could do was set his course for the stars and keep moving forward, one planet at a time, one fight at a time. Until the day came when the galaxy was ready for true change. Until the day came when beings like the Zorgi could live free from fear and oppression. Until that day, Daniel would keep fighting, no matter the cost. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.